welcome to the Brick Boredom Buster. We are going to be learning how to make abstract wall masks today. This is a finished product. Almost finished, I should say. We're going to be painting them later on just so you get a better idea of what the end product is going to be, but for today's purposes, that's what we're going to be doing. So with that said, I'm going to show you all the steps we need to make this piece, all the items necessary, and just so you know, most of these things will be provided by the brick when you order your kit. However, other things can be supplied by just looking around your house. Okay, with that said, let's get started. The first thing that we want to do is roll a slab. We have our clay here. Mine's a little bit messy, but that's okay. And we're going to take it, and using a wire tool, which I have right here, I'm going to cut a piece. Now, not everybody has a wire tool, but that's totally okay. If you want to take a chunk with your hands, that's fine. And if you have dental floss, that would work as a great substitution. So as you can see here, I'm just going to take it and pull through. Now, before I keep going on, it's very important that we get some newspaper or another material that will prevent direct contact with our board or a surface at home. Sometimes people use canvas sheets or whatnot, but really anything works. So we're gonna take this, and I'm just getting all the air bubbles out, or at least to the best of my ability. What I'm using here is called pugged clay, and that means that it's reused clay that was put through a machine to get out all those imperfections. And I'm just gonna roll this around a bit. Now, because we're not in a studio and we don't have the tools necessary to make it perfectly flat, I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger than I normally would. This is primarily because when I'm done rolling it out, I'm gonna have edges that are a bit thinner than the center. And when we're making masks or most anything with clay, we want evenness, not only so it looks good, but it's better for the kiln. So I'm gonna keep rocking this, but in the meantime, I'm gonna show you what our finished product for a slab would look like. Over here, we can see the edges are a little bit thinner, and the center is somewhat consistent on both edges, right? So that's what we're going for. I'm gonna keep working on this one. So this might happen when you're rolling yours out, and that is not a problem. We're just gonna take it, and to the best of our ability, we're going to pull out these imperfections. Now we've got that, and we're gonna wanna cut our edges. It's a good idea, however, to have a template before we go into this step, because we really wanna have everything ready, and so no clay is just waiting. And now an important thing to consider is when you're using scissors or any sort of sharp object, you wanna make sure your parents are okay with this, or at least know what you're doing. So over here we can see that there is symmetry on this, because if you were to fold it, both halves are the same. And I created this by just folding a piece of paper in half and cutting the edge how I like it. When you're working at home, a good thing to use is printer paper. Everyone has that. If you don't, construction paper or anything you can find will really work. And now, if you're not so much interested in symmetry, we can go for the asymmetrical look by taking our scissors and just cutting one half. If we look back to our example, we can see that the top portion is cut out, and over here we have a little slant, whereas that's not true for opposing sides. So I'm gonna go back over here, and I'm feeling a little asymmetrical. So I made a cut right there. Just gonna make a few cuts. And now there's no real rhyme or reason to this, it's kind of whatever you're feeling. So before we move on to the next step, we're just gonna talk about what to do when our hands get a little dirty, because it's gonna happen. So the nature of clay is that it can congeal, and sometimes that'll clog pipes, so it's very important for you to get a water bowl for washing your hands and a secondary bowl for doing the finer cleaning. The reason we do this is because if we were to use our regular sinks, it could easily get clogged, and we don't want that. Now in your studio, sometimes people have edges that are a bit more honed in on the ceramics world, but it's totally okay if you just have any sort of knife or sharp edge that you can find in your own home. Again, please make sure your parents are okay with this and only use what they supply. So, I've got my stencil here. I'm gonna lay it down flat. And like I said earlier, you're gonna have that little bit of a slant on your edges, so you're gonna put it in the middle. If you're more comfortable with cutting those edges first, that's completely okay and up to you. But for right now, I don't feel like that's necessary. So I'm just gonna cut right along. Alright, so we have used our template to cut out what we like, and now the nature of this is that it's always changing, and even though I'm not in love with the shape I made, it's a good starting point. So with that said, we're just going to think about what we kind of want this to look like, and now you can use references of yourself, a self-portrait, things from magazines, animals, your dog, anything you want really. So if that's your inspiration, you might want to make dog ears. For me, using this little reference, I'm going for a little bit more of an abstract thing, so it's not necessarily going to look like anyone I know or anything I can see in the real world, but that's completely okay. With that said, I'm going to use these scraps that I put to the side, and I'm going to make little shapes. Now, when I go and want to make this face, I'm looking for all the regular features that you'd find on a human face. Nose, eyebrows, ears, lips, etc. So I'm going to bring this over here, and now you see this shape. This is generally going to be my chin area, ears, maybe I'll put some hair. So I think I'm going to start with some eyebrows. Now, using this butter knife again, just going to clean that off a little bit. I'm going to put that to the side, and I already have like a general curve, so I'm going to use that. Now before I cut this out, I think it's important for us to texture our surfaces. Now texture is anything that you feel. It can be rough, soft, smooth, etc. And we're going to be using things we find around the house to create these textures. So, over here I have some pasta. It's anything you can find in your regular house. I'm going to take some out. I'm gonna put them down. I'll move this over for you guys. I have my pasta. I have some other kinds of pasta too. The thing is, each noodle is unique and will leave a different print or shape. We also have a pine cone. Its sharp edges will leave a really cool mark. And then these are little things I found around my house. They're wooden flowers, and you can find any sort of shape that you like to put on your face. All right. So with that said, I have one other thing. It's just a ball, it's a wiffle ball, but the fun holes can make a really cool pattern. So I'm going to start by putting these shapes on my face. I think I like the pine cone, so I'll start with that one. All right. So, especially with the things you find in nature, they're irregular, and that means when you put them down, you might not know what you're gonna get when you take it up. And if you're not loving it, that's, again, totally fine. We're just gonna go with it and see what happens. So over here, I have my noodle. I'm just gonna rub it up and down the side, and I'll show you what that looks like. It creates a really cool rippled look. My newspaper is flying away. If you guys wanna do this outside, it's totally cool. Just remember that if the wind blows and your things go everywhere, pick them up when you're done. Now I have my other noodles. I'm gonna press them in gently along the edge. And now this is a lot like what we were talking about with the newspaper. We're gonna do our best to remove everything. But should a noodle break or snap or there's something left over, don't worry, it's totally cool. Generally speaking, you're gonna wanna push it in so that you leave an indent, but not so far that you can't retrieve the item you used. Over here, I'm using a little wooden stick. It's made of bamboo, and they use it for shish kebabs when you're cooking. and it's the perfect shape because it has a pointed edge, and I'm using that to retrieve my noodles. If you don't have a shish kebab stick, that's totally okay. You can use a fork and a prong on the fork. Another important thing to talk about is the angle. Sometimes your hands, if you're a lefty or a righty, things work better when you adjust. So do not be afraid to pick your piece up, move it to what's comfortable for you. With that said, wet clay is delicate, and if you pick things up too quickly, it will break. So now that I have that on the side and my edges, I think I'm gonna go for maybe 1 or 2 more things. Let's try the ball out. Alright, it's kind of funky. The same thing for the ball is true for our rolling pin. Anytime we apply pressure, sometimes that means when we go to the edge of our piece, the clay will get thinner. That's not something to worry about, and again, if we're uncomfortable with that, we can cut the edge off. For me, I'm happy with the way it looks, so we're just gonna keep on going. Now, I think I'm just gonna make 1 more cut to the top. This is completely by choice and not necessary for when you're going. Remember, the template you use is just a starting point, and you're gonna wanna keep working from there. So at this point, if you're feeling like you need a snack to go to the bathroom or anything like that, totally cool. Feel free to take that break. But it's very, very important that you cover your clay. Wet clay allows you to work with it, and when your clay loses its moisture, you lose the ability to mold it. With that said, I'm gonna get my plastic, and I'm going to cover it. I'm gonna keep working, but I'm just gonna show you in case you need to take a break. So I have my plastic sheet. This one happens to be from the laundromat. If you don't have something like that, you can use plastic wrap from home, a Ziploc bag, or anything like that, but just a thin plastic, and I'm gonna cover it. I'm gonna go around all of the edges, making sure I have an airtight seal. Now, this is not good enough if you're gonna leave it for overnight, because this particular plastic will allow air to get in. It's for temporary breaks. But if you feel like that's not enough, you can also get a heavy-duty sort of plastic like the Ziploc and seal the bag completely, or you can get a bowl. If that bowl completely can cover it without hitting any of the edges of your ceramics, feel free to put that on top and leave it. All right, with that said, let's get back to our eyebrows. Okay, so I'm gonna use my little wooden flower. I'm pressing in gently, again with enough pressure to go in, see? At this point, if I were to hold it down, it would not fall out, and that's how I know I have enough pressure. I'm going to use a pin tool, but the equivalent of the pin tool is the wooden dowel like I was talking about before. As you can see, they both have a sharpened edge, and even though one is more fine, for our purposes, that's completely okay. And I'm just going to go and cut this right in half. And then I'm gonna do a smaller semicircle right in the middle. And this looks a little funky, but I think that's what we're going for. Abstract is not meant to be perfect. So actually, it turns out I could use this as an eyebrow or as a smile, so we'll just keep that in mind. And then I'm going to make, what would this be good for? I don't know. Sometimes if you're having a brain block, it's fun just to make shapes. We'll find that oftentimes the shapes we make will later remind us of a different feature on the face, and we can use that as such. Now, before I move on, we're gonna talk a little bit about slipping and scoring, which is basically like the glue of the ceramics world. If you've ever had a shirt with Velcro, you'll notice that each half has an opposing fiber or texture that latches in with one another. The same can be said for clay. when we slip and score, we're basically taking a piece of clay. I'll take one over here. And we're giving it a scratch on the back. We want to make it a visible scratch, and it's okay to have fine or uneven edges. We are not looking for this to look good, but it should be enough that when you go over it with your finger, you feel a raised texture. You're going to do this on your opposing piece of clay. So let's just pretend that this is my mask, and this is my eyebrow. It looks crazy, I know. We have the scoring on this side. We're also going to score on this side. And now we see these two things, and if we were to put them together, they would latch somewhat. But let's go back to that glue piece. That's called slip. And slip is basically clay that's been diluted with water and mixed so that it's a fine material. Over here, I have my clay mixed with water. As you can see, it doesn't look that great. That's okay. And now if you're looking to make this at home, you can just take a small piece of the clay that you were provided with, put it in a bowl with some water and mix it, or use your fingers to kind of squish it up. Once it no longer feels like clay and it's a little more slimy, you know you're probably on the right track. So I have mine over here. It's slippery, but that's good. So we're gonna take it. I'm using my fingers. It's a little messy, that's totally okay. Put my slip down. There's a little bit of water on my surface. I'm gonna go back in, put some on there. And now you might find that when you're slipping and scoring, your slip fills the holes or the creases that you made previously. So we're just gonna wanna reopen some of those holes. And do it for the other piece. Now, we put them together. So that's the general premise. And I'm only saying that because if you're the kind of person who wants to make a piece and put it right down, that's what you're gonna wanna do. My preference is to make all of my pieces and then lay them out in case I wanna make a variation to my face. All right, so I've decided to cut my eyebrows out. They're different shapes, but they're similar, not exact, and that's totally okay. And I also thought that the pattern that I got from my pine cone just was not working for me. It looked a little bit too much like a beard, and I'm not sure that's what I'm going for. So I'm going to be using this tool. Even though this is what you would find in a ceramic studio, and we're not in a ceramic studio, we're at home, you can also use a flat edge, like something you'd find on a spatula or anything else like that. So right now I'll use the spatula just to show you with what you'd be doing at home, and I'm just gonna gently glide over the surface. Now, it's imperfect, so as you can see, there's some striations that are formed, and that's not a concern because we can go over with some clay afterward. I've decided instead that I'm going to try out a different pattern, and right now I have some pearls. Don't worry, I have permission to use these.
So I'm just going to delicately push these in with a bit more pressure. The bigger something is, the farther in you might want to push just because it has that capacity before getting lost in the clay. Sorry, it's particularly windy day today. So I'm going to pull these out. We got a really fun little mug over here.
So, I'm going to use the slab that I made earlier. Not because these don't work, just because they're a little bit smaller than what I'm going for. So I'm going to put these in a pile off to the side. And remember, don't throw this out, it can be reused. So I've got some plastic wrap over here. I'm going to unwrap it. I'm not going to push these all in a ball because I might want to use a bit of the flat part later. And I'm going to cover them as to prevent air from hitting them. Awesome. So, if your wind hasn't blown everything away by this point, you should still have your clay on the table and your slab next to you. I'm going to take this out, and I want for my mouth a bottom pentagon, maybe not a pentagon, we'll see, but maybe a pentagon and then maybe something on the top. But I'm definitely looking for geometric shapes because I've given the curvature to the eyes, so I want to balance that out with something of a different nature. So, let's see. Gonna go for it. Sometimes you have to just experiment and see what happens. Yeah, definitely not a pentagon. That's cool though. looks like a mountain. I'm going to use these for lips. So I've got my mouth. I'm gonna set them off center from one another. What I mean by that is, we're just gonna bring the camera up a little bit to show you. I don't wanna pick this up just because of the pieces. So our top lip is off center from the bottom lip, kind of giving you the impression that they're talking or something like that. All right, let's see. I'm trying to get the gist. Pop that back down. And now I'm gonna make a nose. So right now I'm feeling like I have a lot of smaller pieces strewn across the face, so I want a grounding feature. In other words, I want something that'll bring my attention to the center of the piece and take up a good portion of it, just so we don't feel like our eyes don't know where to go. So I was thinking about what would make the perfect eyebrow, and I realized that I didn't necessarily have a man-made commodity to do that. So I decided to look around because we're outside, and I figured that there had to be a leaf somewhere that resembled an eyebrow. Not a perfect match, but it's close enough. So I'm going to show you quickly, before I do this on my mask itself, how we roll these. Anything that's fine or delicate but has a texture we really want, we're not going to want to necessarily use our hands, because then we'll put imprints like that we don't want in our surface. So I have my rolling pin. I'm just going to go gently on top. And you know you've rolled enough when the clay surrounding your object rises to the surface, so you have a flush or completely smooth top. Over here, if we zoom in, we can see bits of the clay have risen to meet the level of the top of the greenery. So we know we finished. And now I'm just gonna pull up, and we have the perfect imprint of a leaf. Now, when I do this over here, I want a bit of a smaller piece, so you can take however you want. And I just want the bottom. I'm gonna take it. Feel free to adjust to however you want. Over here we already have our eyebrow, and we have a pattern that I don't want to be rubbed out by this roller. So I'm gonna push it in, and that's only because I don't mind having a bit of my fingerprint in there. So once we've made sure we've made contact with all parts of the branch, or the leaf in this case, we know it's okay to pull it off. Now I'm gonna go back to my pin tool. You can use a knife, a fork, whatever you have. And I'm gonna lift up just the edge, only enough that I could pull up. So again, let's see here. I pulled up just that edge, and now, plastic, and my apologies, we're just gonna pull it off, right? So it kind of looks like an eyebrow, only somewhat. We're gonna do a similar thing for this eyebrow, making sure our nose doesn't fly away. In this case, I'm actually flipping my texture around so it looks more like eyelashes. Now I'm pulling it off, and I have my eyelashes. I have one bit of leaf that decided it wanted to stay, so I'll remove that with my pin tool. Alrighty. At this point, we have everything except our eyes. And again, I felt as though I did not have anything around me that would suffice to make an eye. Some people decide that they want to use the end of a chopstick, the back of a fork, anything like this. I know this is a knife, it's a little dangerous, but if you wanted to use anything that has a circle, maybe even a glue stick cap or something of that sort, you could get that circle look. But I actually went into my craft drawer, and I found a little gemstone and an earring, or at least a jewel to an earring. This kind of has that almond-shaped eye look I'm going for, so we can practice again. And it's good to have an extra piece of clay, just so we can see if the image or the print that it makes is something we're interested in using. It's far easier to practice over here than it is to fix on your piece itself. You can't see it right now, but what I'm doing is just pressing in like I've been doing with all my other ones. Alrighty, let's see if that worked. Okay. So, I've yet to slip and score, but at this point, this is what we're working with. It's abstract because we can see there's lots of different variety of pattern and texture, and it's irregular. But I think we should start to slip and score, only because if we leave these pieces out, the smaller piece is, the quicker it'll dry, and that makes it more difficult to slip and score. So I'm gonna start with my eyebrows. What you might wanna do is take the piece, place it where you're interested in having it rest, and outline. This way, you know exactly the place that you wanna slip and score. So as we discussed earlier, when we want to slip and score, basically we're going to be making little striations. A striation is just a line, a little check mark. It's what's left behind from your sharp tool. So going back and forth, we're making little hatch marks, little X's. We want there to be visible difference between the texture we've created and the one outside of the area we're slip and scoring. Now I'm going to do the same for the back of my eyebrow. Now, like I said, it's okay to be aggressive with this. We just don't want to go too hard. The thing about clay is that it's good to go as deep as you can, but at a certain point, if you go all the way through, it's a bit difficult to fix that without there being visible evidence of there having been a problem earlier. So now we're going to revisit the slip we made earlier. We're going to take a bit out. Like I said, the top will tend to be water or just like a less thick consistency, and we're just going to rub this in. So basically right here, it's called the dabbing action. We're just having little bits on the top, and we're not rubbing in so much so to erase the pattern we made earlier, just enough to rest on the surface. If you find that's a bit difficult, totally okay. We're gonna go over, put some of those hatch marks in again, and now we've got our two pieces. It's really important not to neglect the edges of whatever shape you're making, because it's kind of like when you use a glue stick and the pieces of paper have those edges. They're going to want to roll up if you don't glue them down. So now it's sort of like a press and a jiggle type motion. We want to be careful not to get rid of the pattern we created earlier, but if we don't apply enough pressure, this will fall off in the kiln. Alrighty, We have our eyebrows done. Now I'm gonna move on to the nose, but I decided that mine looked a little funky, so I went back and I created a second nose piece. Over here, I just used the tip of my finger and pressed upwards instead of having an entire cutout for each nose, or each side of the nose. So, we're gonna go back, draw our pattern, and slip and score much like we did with the eyebrows. Feel free to adjust until you feel like you're confident with the placement of each piece. On top, push down, and jiggle. And you'll find that the more pressure you apply, the more firmly it will stick. And now you just need to try and find your best to find a happy medium between putting pressure and squishing your clay. Okay, nose applied. All right, so we've got our lips down, and now you can see through the process of slipping and scoring, sometimes you're left with an uneven surface. I'm gonna show you that right now. Although it's not that visible, we can see there's a bit of irregularity on the surface. So I'm just going to take my rolling pin and just go very gently on the top. Now keep the pressure light. Awesome. So we've got that fixed, and I'm gonna do the same for my nose. I'm gonna flatten that out and use my pinky to accentuate my nose, as we can see here. So now you're just gonna watch, and I'm gonna go over and fix any surface imperfections, and then we're going to go on to our final step, which is putting in our holes and getting all the details for our class and our sample numbers, or our class numbers rather. And like I said earlier, once you've decided that there's no more clay you need, it's a good idea to wrap it up and put it off to the side for a later project. In case we didn't get to it yet, when you buy a package from the brick, it's going to come and you're going to have enough clay for 3 pieces. Once you make those 3 pieces, you're going to bring them back and fire, but it's important that we keep all of our extras so we have enough for any projects we want to make. Alright, so now we've come to the final and most important stage, which is labeling. We all know that some of us have the same initials, or at least first and last name initials, so that can get a bit confusing when things are in the kiln, and especially when it's time to return them to you. So we're going to be using our 3 initials, which in my case is Hannah, Alexandra, and then Wiederman, so H-A-W. If you don't have a middle name, that's okay, you can write your first and last full name. We're gonna flip it over. I'm just gonna turn turn mine this way, just so I can see it a bit better. And clearly, we're going to write on the back. Now it's important we don't do a stabbing motion. We're going to do a gliding motion. So that means using our writing utensil on an angle. Over here on the bottom, I'm going to do an H. And again, enough pressure to leave visible marks. A and W. So, the second part of labeling your piece is putting the code and the number of your item. Every person is allowed to make 3 pieces for each kit or amount of clay they get. If this is your first piece, you're going to put an X-1. The X stands for this class, which is the abstract face mask for the wall. The 1 will indicate that this is your first piece. If it's your second piece, you'll put a 2. If it's your third, you'll put a 3. In this case, it's my first piece, so right above my name, or right below, it doesn't matter, whatever you're feeling comfortable with. I'm going to put an X-1. X for this class, 1 for the number item. Remember, it correlates with what number piece you're making. Now that I've had that down, and I put both my initials and my class number, I'm basically ready to go. So now that we flipped it over, we can see we've basically got our finished mask. It's not perfect, but it's abstract, and that's what we were going for. We've got our 2 holes, we've got our label and initials on the back, and everything is well attached. If you have any doubts at all that your pieces, the little eyebrows, nose, and whatnot, will fall off, do your best to make sure that they are properly slipped and scored. If you fall off, there's going to be some issues later, which can sometimes be remedied by glaze, but not always, so we want to prevent that. So now, this is all finished, and we're just going to let it dry.
Anna, it's Julia here. So today we're going to paint the surface of the mask. When you get your mask, it's going to be 1 color glaze. And I just want to show you how you can make it more colorful with using acrylics. You can use any acrylic, but I would just go with something that gives you variety and that comes in a tube. Okay, so when you pour out your paint from the tube, remember you can't put it back in, so be very sparingly. You can always take more out of the tube. I'm going to paint on this surface right now, which is glazed, and there are many different brushes to work with. I prefer the flat edge brush. It pushes the acrylics better. The rounded brush is more for watercolors. It holds water, it has a plume at the end, and it's very soft in its bristles, so it's not best for acrylics, but you could use it. You also can use a fan brush for different techniques, which I'll show. You can also use nail polish if you don't have acrylic paints. You can use whiteout, and I'll show you whiteout. It's kind of cool. So you just take the whiteout. I would use whiteout for just like dabbing details, like possibly dots. I wouldn't use it to brush a whole surface white because it is chalky and it will brush off. But the nail polish is a little bit more translucent. It's not as opaque as whiteout. That's why I like whiteout. Okay, so now we're going to start with acrylics. So when you take your acrylics, you want to hold your brush down lower on the brush itself because you want it to be detailed and a lot of control. If you're painting a larger area, you back your hand out to paint large surfaces. So I'm going to move my hand down, wet my brush a little bit. I'm going to start with the red, and I'm just going to paint possibly the nose red. And it covers it pretty well. You might have to do a second coat if it doesn't. Sometimes mixing it with the white makes it a little bit more opaque versus translucent. Yeah. So take your time with this, it's not a rush. You can paint over any ceramic glazeware with acrylic paint. When you're done with painting, you can get a sealant, which is a ceramic sealer like this. It's called Super Gloss Ceramic Sealer. Perfect. Okay. So if you're not happy with what you did, you can just wipe that right off. Take even newspaper with paper towel, and just it comes right off. That's what's nice about painting on glazeware, because it's not porous underneath, it comes right off. Okay, so then you could just go to your other colors, and you can get as colorful as this. But I kind of like the glaze showing through, some glossy glaze showing through, and then some areas acrylic. You don't want to paint the whole entire thing, because that's the beauty of having it glazed. You just want to have some areas painted and some areas not. And you can string it with copper, you can string it with rope, depending on where you're going to hang this. So just take your time, plan it, and have fun. Okay, thank you.